After years of speculation, it has finally happened. Wilfried Zaha has left Crystal Palace. My favorite player from my favorite team has left the club to join Galatasaray to play in the Champions League. Well, hopefully. And it hurts. There's no real silver lining to this. He left on a free, and he's an academy graduate who helped the team reach the Premier League 10 years ago, has been crucial to us staying in the Premier League. And to make matters worse, his successor, Michael Olise, is currently being courted by Chelsea and Man City. We are in trouble. Crystal Palace is in a bad spot right now. This is the worst I've felt about the club since Frank de Boer was in charge, and the worst I've felt in off-season since 2016 before Benteke was signed. Things are looking bad. If you're unaware about Crystal Palace, the team is built in a pretty weird way. A lot of the squad really doesn't belong in the Premier League, and then there's a small portion of players who should be playing in the Champions League. And with Zaha leaving and Olise potentially leaving, and at least definitely missing time due to injury, that small portion is down to just Eze, Decore, Gehi, and Anderson. Plus, Sam Johnston's a pretty good goalkeeper. He's probably the only guy who's at the right level in this team, just a mid-table Premier League shot stopper. He's good. We already had a lot of holes in our squad, but with Zaha and Olise leaving, now our entire attack just looks bad. And that's on top of issues in the midfield and at fullback. In the attack, Ayew and Edouard aren't bad players, but they're not finishers. We'll be lucky to get 5 goals out of them. And then there's Mateta, who's not a good finisher, and he doesn't even offer the off-ball work. And aside from them, the team is young and unproven. Sakai had a very good season last year on loan in League One. That's League One in England, not France. And so that's going to be a tough transition to the Premier League. Amida came in last season, and he's been starting as a winger for us, but I believe that's out of position, and for someone who's already struggled to impact games, I'm not expecting too much of him. Then there's young players like EYBI and Plange, who could have positive impact. They do have a lot of promise, but again, it's going to be tough to adjust to the Premier League. A lot of those attackers, I like them for the future, but for this season, I'm not sure they're going to have much of an impact. The attack doesn't look strong, but thankfully it is the worst part of the team, and the midfield behind them actually looks pretty good. Eze is one of our really good players, such a creative, dynamic attacking threat, who might even be playing as a winger this season. Then Decore behind him, really good defensive midfielder. Liverpool's linked with him for a reason. And then Lerma comes into the club, and he looks like somebody who would raise the level of play. He might be somebody like Sam Johnston, who's just a decent Premier League player who could really just establish some solidity in the team. And even the depth behind them isn't that bad. Schlupp had a pretty good season last year. I'm a fan of Will Hughes. And maybe, probably not, Riedewald might be able to impact the team. The midfield's the least of the worries for this team. The defense is a bit of a mixed bag. Gehi and Anderson at center back is one of the strongest pairings in the league. And I mean that. Both are very good both on the ball and defensively, and big clubs want to sign them for a reason. Center back is a pretty big strength in this team. But then there's fullback, which is a weakness. Tyreek Mitchell hasn't improved much since he broke through at the team. He's been alright defensively. I don't think it's a big strength of him. He can make mistakes at times, and he doesn't offer anything going forward. Then at right back, we have Joel Ward and Nathaniel Klein, who were good Premier League players in their prime, especially Klein at Liverpool. But they're not in their prime anymore, and they might be a bit of a weak point of the team. Now, thankfully, the squad is managed by Roy Hodgson, who has been able to put good defenses together. And I think Mitchell could be fine. I'd like to have another option other than playing Schlupp or Riedewald out of position. And right back, it seems like it'll be okay, but fullback definitely isn't a strength. But with the strength of our center backs and a good goalkeeper, I don't think letting in goals is going to be the issue for the team. I think scoring them is more of the problem. That's where things stand for Palace at the moment. There's a pretty good spine to the team, but a lot of issues in the squad, and the attack is really bad. Now, there are signings that are going to come in. We are going to be replacing Wilfried Zaha. He did leave on a free, but he was our highest paid player, so we will be able to allocate those wages elsewhere. But I wanted to look at how things look as things stand compared to the rest of the Premier League, and see how we shape up right now. This is where things start to look up for Crystal Palace, as I believe the Premier League is a lot weaker this year at the bottom than was the previous season. Now, it might sound weird to talk positively about teams that got relegated, but Southampton and Leicester were putting together some really good teams for a while. Southampton had a very strong squad. I mean, Liverpool won the Champions League with a decent amount of Southampton players in their team. And Leicester, I don't think I have to talk about them too much. They won the Premier League, they had an FA Cup run, and they're pushing for Europe up until things just fell apart. And they're being replaced by some teams that might not be able to thrive in the Premier League. Sheffield United and Luton Town both got promoted last year, and both the teams really haven't invested too much, and I don't see them investing much at all. And their squads aren't exactly Premier League quality. Sheffield were able to stay up one season a few years ago, but then they were the worst team in the Premier League when they got relegated. And the team hasn't changed too much since then. I'm a fan of Njai, I'm a fan of Sander Berge for Sheffield United, but the team as a whole looks pretty weak, and if they don't make some big signings soon, they look likely to go down by a pretty wide margin. And the same thing for Luton Town. It's a great story that they were able to get promoted, but looking at the signings they're making, I think they're preparing for next season's championship as opposed to trying to stay in the Premier League. Then there's Wolves, who look pretty bad. Due to their overspending in the past, they're losing a lot of players and not replacing them with many great guys. Ruben Neves has gone, as well as Collins, and then losing a core of their players who haven't played too much recently, but were crucial to them being good a few years ago. And as mentioned before, the signings coming in aren't strong. Cunha was really overspent on. And I do like some players in the rest of the team, like Kilman, Nunez, Gomez. Like, they do seem like good players. It's a bit similar to Crystal Palace, so they have some strong guys in between some weaker players. But as a whole, I think they're kind of similar in that they have a really weak attack and some decent players surrounding them. But I think they're in a worse position. Lopetegui is a good manager, but I'm not sure he'll do the best in a relegation fight. And with their finances, they look unlikely to be able to improve their squad. I think as things stand, Palace is the better team, and I think they're only going to get better, and Wolves might continue to get worse. Then there are the other teams who may get relegated. Everton looked very bad last season, barely managing to survive, and they haven't improved their squad yet. And there's Forest and Bournemouth, who may suffer some regression this year. Then Burnley looked very good in the Championship last year, but it can always be tough for newly promoted teams. And maybe a team like Fulham could suffer second season syndrome hard, or West Ham could suffer some more regression. They looked bad in the Premier League last season, and they did lose their best player. I think out of those squads, one or two of them could end up being very bad next season. And because of that, I'm feeling a bit more confident about Crystal Palace. Are we in bad shape? Yes, but are we in worse shape than Luton, Sheffield United, and Wolves? No, and I'm betting that at least one of those other teams is going to have a really bad season. Now, could things be better for Crystal Palace? Obviously, and I'm hoping we still have some signings to make, but even as things stand, I don't think we'd be favorites to get relegated. Then there's the signings that need to be made, and Crystal Palace have been making some pretty good ones as of late. Eze, Olise, Decore, Gehi, Anderson have all come in and be very good players. And strikers have been a weakness for this team for a while, and if we're able to put the money from Zaha's wages into a very good young striker, then we might be pushing for the top 10 as opposed to being in a relegation fight. Now that is a what if, but I think it's a decent possibility. And all this is assuming that Michael Olise leaves the club, which isn't certain at all. Even if he comes back in around October, I think we'd be in pretty good shape. Overall, I do think that Crystal Palace is in pretty bad shape, certainly worse than last season at the start, but things aren't all bad. If we're able to bring in a decent signing to replace Zaha and keep Olise, I think we'll be pretty good this season. And even if we do neither of those, I don't think we're in the bottom 3 clubs in the league. And that's been pretty good for me, because I've been very worried about this team since the day where Zaha left and Olise looks like he could be moving to Chelsea. And it's been pretty good therapy for me. This happened a while ago, I think the 2021 summer, where I was like, oh, this team looks like in really bad shape, and I looked into it, and it's like, no, I think it'll be fine. It's been good therapy for me, just being able to take a step back, look at the rest of the league, and go, okay, I think we're in decent shape. Now, it still will likely be a relegation fight, and I mentioned pushing top 4 or top 10, and I don't think that's likely to happen. Maybe we'll be able to settle in at 12th like we usually do. I think this team will be worse than they were in the previous season, but Roy Hodgson has a pretty good record with Crystal Palace, and I think I'd bet on this team to stay up right now. And yeah, I want to talk about my favorite team. Felt like before, it's like, oh, should I really be talking about them? It means Crystal Palace, and I was like, I made a video on AFC Wimbledon's goalkeepers. I can talk about this, and yeah, that's all I gotta talk about. See ya.